The Galactic Council, an ancient and powerful assembly of the universe's most advanced and diverse species, presided over the fate of entire worlds. Its members were not bound by any single planet's laws or morals. They were the ultimate arbiters, and their word was law. In their sprawling crystalline chamber, filled with alien forms of unimaginable variety, the fate of one human was about to be sealed. At the center of the chamber stood a solitary figure, Jonathan Reese, a former soldier of Earth. His once pristine uniform, now stained with the scars of battle and rebellion, clung to his muscular frame. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto the sea of alien faces before him. Some were humanoid. Others were nothing like anything a human could comprehend. Shifting, pulsating beings of light and shadow, towering insectoid creatures, and gelatinous masses that spoke in waves of sound. They were the Council, and they were his judges. Reese had once been a hero, a soldier who had fought in countless battles across the stars, defending his planet against invaders and keeping the peace in the galaxy's farthest reaches. But that was before the war turned him into something else. Now, he was an outlaw, a symbol of rebellion, and the Galactic Council had finally caught up with him. The charges were numerous. His attacks on alien colonies had left entire planets in ruin. He had incited uprisings against the very beings that had once called him an ally. His refusal to bend to the will of the Council had made him a target, and now he stood before them, accused of crimes that spanned the galaxy. Jonathan Reese intoned the Council spokesperson, a tall, slender creature with glowing blue skin and eyes that seemed to see through time itself. You stand accused of defying the peace we have worked to maintain for millennia. Your actions have caused the deaths of thousands, the destruction of entire colonies. You are no longer a soldier of Earth. You are a threat to all sentient life in this galaxy. Reese's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. He had been expecting this. He had known that standing up to the Council would bring consequences, but he had not expected to face them alone. His comrades, those who had fought beside him in the trenches, had long since fallen. Some had been executed. Others had disappeared into the vastness of space, lost to the Council's reach. Now, it was just him. He glanced around the chamber, noting the indifferent stares of the Council members. They were not interested in his side of the story. They had already decided his fate. The question was no longer whether he was guilty, but how he would die. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the spokesperson asked, his voice cold and devoid of empathy. Reese's lips curled into a slight smile. "I've always fought for freedom," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I didn't start this war, but I'll be damned if I let you finish it by crushing every last ounce of resistance." The Council remained silent for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Reese could feel their judgment weighing down on him, but he stood tall, unwavering. "We have heard enough," the spokesperson finally declared. "Your defiance will not be tolerated. The sentence is death." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Reese's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had known this was coming. What he didn't know was the manner of his execution. The Council's punishments were often swift, but they were also symbolic, and they had chosen something particularly final for him. The executioner, a massive being with a body that seemed to be made of shifting metal and energy, stepped forward. In its hands was a weapon unlike any Reese had ever seen, a blade forged from a substance that seemed to absorb light, its edge shimmering with a dark, unnatural energy. The weapon was a symbol of the Council's power, an instrument of finality. Reese's mind raced, but he stood his ground. There was no escaping this. He had no illusions about the Council's power, but there was one thing they had not accounted for: his will. They could take his life, but they could not take his spirit. The executioner raised the blade, its dark energy humming in the silence of the chamber. Reese closed his eyes for a brief moment, his mind flashing to memories of Earth, the green fields, the laughter of friends, the faces of those he had fought to protect. He would not die as a slave to the Council's rule. If this was to be his end, he would face it on his own terms. With a swift motion, the blade descended. The room held its breath. Reese's head fell to the floor, and the chamber fell silent. The Galactic Council, so sure of their victory, watched with cold satisfaction. The execution was complete. The human had been eliminated, but they had no idea what they had just unleashed. The room was eerily silent as Reese's headless body crumpled to the cold, metallic floor. The Galactic Council watched with cold detachment, their alien eyes fixed on the lifeless form of the human they had so decisively condemned. His body, still twitching from the brutal severance, lay motionless, and the blade, dark and shimmering, was already retracting back into the executioner's arm. To the Council, it was over. They had delivered their judgment, and the galaxy would be rid of this rebellious human. But something was wrong. The first signs were subtle. A flicker of energy, a faint pulse that seemed to radiate from the remains of Reese's body. The executioner, a towering figure made of shifting metal and energy, tilted its head, its sensors detecting something beyond the usual death throes of a condemned prisoner. The Council's members, usually composed and unshaken, began to murmur amongst themselves. The floor beneath Reese's body began to hum, faint at first, like the reverberation of an ancient, forgotten power stirring in the depths of space. Then, as if responding to some unseen force, the air around the corpse seemed to grow colder. A dark, ethereal mist began to seep from the wound, coiling like smoke, swirling around the headless body. The Council, unnerved but unwilling to show weakness, remained seated. They had seen the impossible before, but never like this. They had executed thousands of beings over the eons, but none had ever returned, let alone in such a manner. Reese's body stirred, and the mist thickened. The Council watched, their curiosity now outweighing their arrogance. Was this some final trick of the human spirit? A desperate attempt to defy death? No! This was something else. This was power. From the center of the mist, a faint glow began to pulse, growing brighter with each passing second. A crackling, unnatural energy filled the chamber, distorting the very air. The ground trembled slightly, as though the universe itself was recoiling in surprise. The Council members exchanged uneasy glances, their alien minds struggling to comprehend what was unfolding before them. And then, with a sound like the tearing of reality itself, Reese's body jerked upright. His limbs, once lifeless, now moved with eerie precision. The mist coiled around his form, enveloping him in a dark shroud. The air hummed with power, and the glow intensified, until the chamber was bathed in an otherworldly light. But Reese was not the man he had been moments ago. His body had been transformed. His face was gone, replaced by a void, a dark, empty space where his head had once been. His body was now clad in tattered remnants of his old uniform, but it was no longer the uniform of a soldier. It was the cloak of something darker, something more powerful. His form was spectral, ghostly, and the energy around him pulsed like a heartbeat, alive with fury. The Council members recoiled, their various forms shifting uneasily. They had seen creatures of immense power, but this was something new, something terrifying. The headless figure, Reese, or whatever he had become, stood motionless for a moment, as though gathering his strength. Then, without warning, he moved. With a sudden surge of speed, he was no longer standing still. He was a blur, a phantom, darting across the chamber with a speed that defied logic. The Council security systems activated, but it was too late. The headless figure was already upon them. He moved with precision, his movements fluid and unnatural, as if he were part of the very shadows themselves. His hands, now long and skeletal, reached out, and the air around him crackled with dark energy. The Council's elite guards, some of the galaxy's most powerful beings, attempted to retaliate, but they were no match for the speed and force of the headless figure. One by one they fell. Their weapons were useless against him, and their attempts to subdue him only made him stronger. The Council's members watched in stunned silence as their own warriors were reduced to nothing more than wisps of smoke, disintegrating in the wake of the headless figure's power. The spokesperson, the one who had condemned Reese to death, stood frozen in his seat. His glowing blue eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the destruction unfold. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The headless figure, once human, turned toward the speaker. The mist around him thickened, swirling like a storm. A deep, guttural voice, one that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the universe, spoke. It was Reese's voice, but distorted, twisted by the power that now coursed through him. "I am not your execution to be forgotten," the voice boomed. "I am the reckoning of humanity. I am the headless horseman of your judgment." The spokesperson's eyes flickered with a hint of fear. "You cannot." "I will," the headless figure interrupted, his voice a low growl. He raised his hands, and the room seemed to tremble. The very air around the council began to distort, as though reality itself was being bent by his will. The council, once so powerful, now found themselves powerless. They had thought they had eliminated the human threat, but they had only awakened something far worse. The headless figure stepped forward, his presence dominating the chamber. His energy was overwhelming, and the once mighty council now realized the truth. They had underestimated the power of humanity, their resilience, their spirit, their ability to rise even in the face of death. Reese had not just survived, he had transcended. And now, he was coming for them. The Galactic Council had never known fear. Not truly. They had watched empires rise and fall, civilizations crumble, and countless species bow before their rule. But now, as the headless figure of Jonathan Reese loomed before them, they were beginning to understand a fear they had never felt. The very foundation of their power, the belief that they were invincible, was shattering before their eyes. Reese, the headless horseman, was no longer merely a man. He was something far more dangerous, a force of nature, a living embodiment of humanity's defiance. His spectral form moved with unnatural grace, his presence warping the very fabric of reality around him. The mist that surrounded him swirled like a storm, and the air crackled with dark energy. His glowing, empty gaze seemed to pierce through the council's defenses, unraveling their confidence piece by piece. The spokesperson, the one who had delivered Reese's sentence, stood frozen. His once calm demeanor had been replaced by a flicker of terror. His glowing blue eyes darted around the chamber, taking in the destruction that had already unfolded. The guards, elite warriors from across the galaxy, were nothing more than charred remnants, their bodies disintegrated by the headless figure's wrath. The chamber, once pristine and orderly, was now a war zone, filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Reese, or whatever he had become, moved toward the council members. His hands, long and skeletal, stretched out, and the dark energy around him pulsed in time with his steps. The council tried to react, but they were paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his power. They had never anticipated this. They had believed that by executing him, they could eliminate the human threat once and for all. But in doing so, they had created something far worse. The spokesperson found his voice, trembling as he spoke. "You cannot defeat us. We are the council. You are the council," Reese interrupted, his voice booming, filled with a cold, unyielding fury. "But you are not invincible. You are not gods. You are just parasites, feeding off the lives of others." The spokesperson's eyes widened. "You will never succeed. The galaxy is vast, and there are others who will come for you. You cannot stand alone." Reese tilted his head slightly, the void where his head had once been radiating an eerie glow. "I am humanity," he said, his voice low and reverberating. "We stand together, even in death. You may have the galaxy's power, but you will never understand what drives us." With a sudden, violent motion, Reese raised his hands, and the room seemed to tremble. The very walls of the chamber shook as though they were being torn apart by an invisible force. The council members clutched their seats, their alien bodies straining to maintain control. But it was useless. Reese's power was overwhelming, and their technology, their might, was no match for his newfound strength. One by one, the council members stood, their faces filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear. They had underestimated the human spirit. They had thought that Reese, a single man, could be erased with a single strike. But they had failed to realize that humanity was not so easily extinguished. They had failed to realize that Reese was not just a soldier or a rebel. He was the embodiment of humanity's refusal to be controlled. The spokesperson, desperate now, raised his arms in a futile attempt to summon the council's final weapon, a massive energy cannon hidden deep within the chamber's core. But as he activated the device, Reese moved with terrifying speed. In an instant, he was upon the spokesperson, his skeletal hands gripping the alien's throat. The mist around him thickened, and the room grew colder still. "You think you can control the galaxy," Reese said, his voice a guttural growl. "But you've never understood what it means to fight for something more than yourself." The spokesperson's struggles were futile. His once imposing form now seemed fragile, helpless against the force Reese had become. With a single, swift motion, Reese squeezed, and the spokesperson's body crumpled to the ground lifeless. The other council members watched in horror, their fear now palpable. They had never seen a being so powerful, so relentless. Reese was not just a threat. He was a symbol of something greater, something they could never control. Reese turned his attention to the remaining members of the council. "This is your reckoning," he said, his voice cold and final. "You will never again rule with impunity. Humanity will rise, and you will fall." The remaining council members attempted to fight back, launching waves of energy and attempting to summon reinforcements. But it was useless. Reese was everywhere and nowhere at once, a blur of dark energy and fury. With each strike, with each movement, the council's defenses crumbled. Their technology, their weapons, their arrogance, all of it was powerless against the wrath of a humanity they had underestimated. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the council members fell. The chamber was silent once more, save for the distant hum of the dying systems. Reese stood in the center, his form still radiating dark energy, his presence undeniable. The Galactic Council was no more. But Reese did not linger. He had come for one thing and one thing only, to prove that humanity could not be crushed. They had tried to snuff out his spirit, to erase his existence, but they had failed. In the end, it was not their technology, their power, or their wisdom that had won the day. It was the human spirit, the unyielding will to survive, to fight, and to never give up. As Reese turned to leave, the chamber began to collapse around him. The once pristine walls cracked and crumbled, the energy systems flickering out of existence. The galaxy, now free from the oppressive rule of the Council, would change forever. Reese vanished into the void, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the stars for millennia to come. Humanity had triumphed, not through might, but through the strength of its spirit, and the galaxy would never be the same,